Okay, folks, I need to do some revision to my scorecard that I've been presenting at the end of my comic book reviews. Now, I am not going to be rearranging any of the rankings that I have currently assigned to any of the books. Those are going to be carved in stone. However, it occurred to me, and has occurred to me for a while now, that I've actually been leaving a few books off the list. And largely that is because the first time that I ever realized I needed a scorecard was when I was going from ISOM number one to ISOM number two. Those books were so different in character that I needed a way to just at a glance tell readers what I thought of the books in general. So I kind of had to go back and retroactively assign a 6.0 score to ISOM number one. I found ISOM number one to be a generally good story. It actually follows a decent story structure according to the Save the Cat model. Um, but it's just got so many technical flaws that hamper it that it becomes painful to read at times. So it's not a bad book, and it did definitely leave me wanting more. So I put that down at 6.0, which is kind of basically saying you're scraping the bottom of the barrel for being a good comic. ISOM number two, however, was a disaster. ISOM number two was all over the map. It went in directions nobody could have expected, much less was looking for it to go, introducing characters that really probably could have been saved for another issue. Uh, it was just all freaking over the place, and so I had to give it a 3.0. Next up was Alpha Core number one, which shares the 6.0 ranking with ISOM number one, and largely because Alpha Core number one is a complete story in and of itself, which helps it. There's also the fact that the characterizations by Chuck Dixon are at least fairly entertaining, and the storyline, although it doesn't always make sense, is at least entertaining, and it does kind of leave you wondering where is the team going to go from here on out, especially in relationship with the villains of the book. So, depending on how Alpha Core number two turns out, Rip'emverse might have a good book on its hands in Alpha Core number one, but we'll see. We have to get past the Horseman first before we can get back to Alpha Core. Next, we have Ethan Van Sciver's Comicsgate offering Cyberfrog number two, Wrecked Planet. And this book I found to be the best of the ones that I had reviewed so far, with one exception, which I will be adding to the list later on. But Cyberfrog number two has in continuing the story from Cyberfrog number one, Blood Honey and the Diary of Heather Swain, opens our eyes to a new world that's been conquered by the Vespas, and Cyberfrog is having to find his place amongst a camp of refugees in which his friend Heather Swain lives, and you get to not only do you get the standard great artwork and decent writing that normally comes from Ethan Van Sciver book, but you also have those moments of dread and horrific expectation that really hook into you and make you feel like you need to know what happens next. So 7.5, highest rating so far, going to Cyberfrog number two, but it's not actually the highest rated book that I've done so far, but we'll have to get back around to that. Yaira number one comes in at 4.5. This rather miserable first offering by the Soska sisters takes the extraordinarily popular Yaira character, or at least she was at the time that ISOM number one was released, not so much by the time her comic finally came out, thanks in part to art problems with the book that that Ethan Van Sciver pointed out in great detail in one of his videos. I highly recommend watching his dissection of Yaira number one, showing where all of the art changes took place. And but it was just basically a long mediocre, poorly dialogued uh, jaunt through this Yaira person's life and past that was it was only meagerly entertaining. And even though it ended up being fairly well drawn, it just the artwork was just not enough to carry it, and it really soured me on the Soska sisters in terms of their writing. I doubt I'll be reviewing Bloodruth, which is also scheduled to be reviewed by them. And I've also come to question whether or not they actually wrote Black Widow No Restraints Play, which is what they're hailed for. I tend to think that they just delivered a treatment for it, and then Marvel went and did the rest, because the dialogue quality in Yaira does not measure up to the dialogue quality in No Restraints Play. Let's see. King of Justice is actually number one. Is actually the first non-Comicsgate, non-Rippaverse entry that I've reviewed. It's by Andrew Rowland, and it has to do with a futuristic world that may or may not be Earth. It has both technology and dinosaurs for some reason. And in this world, apparently, the god of the universe has appointed a homeless individual to become his avatar on Earth and bring justice to the Earth. For what reason, we're not really sure yet. And for whom he's going to be fighting, we've only got kind of a little bit of a clue. But we'll be finding out more about that in King of Justice number 2, which I probably will review later. So that one came in. It's kind of a charming manga style to it, and good dialogue. So I gave that one a 5.5, coming in just under the 6.0 rating, but nevertheless, I think it qualifies for getting a second chance with King of Justice number 2. 4.0 is the score I assigned to Naturalites number 0 through number 1 by Biff Bam Boom Comics, father-son team of Felipe and Sean Fry. And this book was severely hampered by spelling, punctuation, word choice, grammar errors. Just the English language errors abounded in this book, to the point that by the time you even got to the story, you knew that you were in for some painful reading, which is kind of unfair to the story itself. The story itself is fairly interesting, dealing with two different branches of a superhuman race that went their separate ways and are now in conflict. It's kind of a little bit reminiscent of Jack Kirby's New Gods. And there are some art issues. The painting is fairly top notch. The color scheme could probably use some work. And the layouts have issues in that there's a whole lot of close-ups and faraway shots, and that's kind of a common theme with Felipe Fry's artwork, which will carry over into a couple of the other books of Biff Bam Boom Comics, and it's something that he really needs to get away from. I would even suggest getting a copy of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way. I mean, just get that basic Bible of artistic information down and absorb that, and then you combine that with his painting style, and he would be a force to be reckoned with. The worst scored, I'm still in post-traumatic stress disorder on account of Gooding number 1. Gooding number 1 was so very bad. Oh my god. And the thing is that Mike Baron is a good writer, so I cannot conceive that this is attributable solely to him. I really think that Rippaverse editorial both gutted and fluffed the hell out of the script that Mike Barron delivered to them. My working theory is that he delivered a script for a 96-page book. They said either we can't put out a book of this size for some reason, or we don't like the last half of your book. And so they chopped the book in half, released the first half as if it were a complete issue, and completely screwed the pooch in every conceivable way. Gooding #1 is just by far the worst Rippaverse offering out there, and I only saved it from a 0.5 rating on account of Will Conrad's consistently good artwork. Um, he's got a he's got a great eye for art. I'll just put it that way, and he does the job competently well. It's just that the story of the book in no way measures up to the kind of quality he's capable of delivering. And yet, it's not the worst book I've reviewed, and that'll be coming up later as well. 5.0 goes to Inglorious Rex #1, the Comicsgate offering from the husband-wife team of Shane Davis and Yanzi Lin. Yeah, I had higher hopes for this one than it delivered on. Looking for that kind of Rocky with Monsters story, something that would be inspiring along the lines of Hugh Jackman's movie Real Steel, which I would highly recommend. But it really fell flat in that its character was bland and not entirely likable. Most of the characters were only just kind of surface developed, and the monsters even were not inspiring to see. There were also a little bit of art issues and some clipping, and not being able to just get a good grasp on size and scope of the scenes that we were given, and mostly a lack of heroism just pervades this book, where everything is in a bleak setting filled with even bleaker characters that none of them exude the kind of heroism you would expect from a book. And so to even associate it with Rocky is kind of doing Rocky a disservice. Last but not least, we've got Cargo #1 to #2. This is from a non-Comicsgate, non-Rippaverse book from Andrew M. Rodriguez, and this is one that I actually had the privilege of editing, and so I have really enjoyed this book. It has to do with a trucker who, of course, is assigned some mysterious cargo to deliver, but it also involves another protagonist, a young woman, who has something in common with this trucker, that even though neither of them know each other, they're both converging toward the same location, and they've also both got enemies on their trail. And so what we're going to find is in future issues, most likely, is they are going to blend as a crew in trying to get his cargo delivered, and having to wrestle with their past traumas as well as with their present day foes over the course of this story. So Cargo #1 and #2, I gave a 7.0. I enjoy the quirky stylistic artwork and the sharp characterizations of all of these protagonists and their supporting crew. It's a very refreshing read, and I highly recommend it. And I've got an editor's credit in it. Now, these are not all the books that I have reviewed, though. There are actually 4 other comics that should be on this list. And it is because 3 of them, really, were reviewed prior to ISOM #1, or at least prior to ISOM #2, that I never put them on this list, because I never had the reason to assign them a score at the time that I had reviewed them. The other problem that I had in just going ahead and revising this list was that the last comic of the 4 is one that was so bad, I just stopped reading it partway through. Or rather, stopped reviewing it partway through. Of course, I read the rest of the comic, but I just didn't care anymore by that point because the comic had left such a bad impression on me that there was no sense in even trying to give it a review. Even though there were elements of it that were technically good. And so I had such mixed feelings about it, I couldn't give it a zero point 0 or a zero point 0.5 because it was a better book than that. But at the same time, it doesn't deserve the same kind of consideration as these other works do. I just realized how to solve that problem, which is why I'm doing this scorecard revision now. But let's start from the top of the line, which actually belongs to Cyberfrog number 1 to number 1.5. You've got Blood Honey and the Diary of Heather Swain, 1998. This is the first in the new Cyberfrog set, Cyberfrog having been originally published by Hall of Heroes and Harris Comics way, way back in the day, but this is the rebooted version of Cyberfrog. It covers his origin in great detail, his mission in great detail, and of course has art in great detail, as is Ethan Van Sciver's wont to draw. Um, and he's very, very good with montage work. So, and this book is largely montage. There's more linear storytelling towards the end of Cyberfrog number 1 and in Cyberfrog number 1.5. And although Cyberfrog number 1.5 kind of shows events of the book happening from Heather Swain's point of view. So there's not a lot of new content so much as there is just a new perspective on what's going on. So we don't get a whole lot of linear storytelling in the book, but we do get a lot of montage storytelling at which Ethan Van Sciver especially excels because he loves drawing these full-page spreads that show so much detail and give these whap you upside the face kind of impressions of characters and their stories, etc., etc. So this I put at an 8.0. Cyberfrog number 2 is slightly below that just because of the more fully linear nature of that and the fact that there are some story issues here and there. But for the most part, they're largely on par. Next, we've got a couple of comics from Biff Bam Boom Studios, who did the Naturalites. These were some better entries earlier on, one called Interstella and another called Cody Valiant. These 0 issues excuse me, detail these characters' origins, or at least their first stories, in the case of Cody Valiant 0, although a later edition of Cody Valiant 0 does contain an origin story. But Interstella is the tale of a trucker who runs across a bounty hunter from outer space, and they apparently have a mission to go around the country and start rounding up criminals from outer space. So this basically details the first encounter between the trucker and the space bounty hunter. And it's a very, very charming story. It's quirky, and it also has the same painted style as Naturalites. I think because there's a smaller scope to Interstella than the painted style, with its limitations as far as the layouts go, come less into play. But at the same time, it's still hampered by the spelling, punctuation, just English language challenges. And the same goes for Cody Valiant, but these are much more entertaining characters than I found the Naturalites to be. And I think that I saw a lot more potential in these stories, especially in Interstella, given that the what I called the space bounty hunter meets highway to heaven theme really sets it up to be kind of an episodic series that you could even option for a TV show. So that led me to feel like these were superior entries in the Biff Bam Boom Comics collection. And now we have to address the worst comic I reviewed. And this is not worst based on its technical flaws so much. Excuse me. Because in terms of technical quality, the art's actually pretty good. The story's actually pretty good. The problem is two things. The quality control was absolute ass. I got to the point of a particular double page spread. And in this double page spread, not only was the dialogue that existed in the wrong places on the page, in other words, what should have happened at the beginning of the double page spread was instead being told to us at the end of the double page spread. But it's worse than that, because one of the middle captions of the double page spread was actually repeated on the page in a different version. Two versions of the identical caption were given on the page. And when I saw that, I just about lost it. Because anybody who was reading this book with an eye to picking up mistakes would have seen that. Which means they just basically threw it out there and didn't give any consideration to doing a quality control run on it. I mean, this was just absolutely inexcusable. This is not the same thing as, having the word and appear twice in a sentence, or, having a and or something like that, like happened in ISOM number 1. This was, you basically had the character say the same thing twice in a row. And there's no way that happens if you're actually caring about quality. And so at that point, it's like, if you don't care about quality, I can't care about your book. But then it got worse, because I recognized a line of dialogue from the book. And this book was, or the line of dialogue I recognized as coming from a movie. And I was like, am I just, are my eyes deceiving me that this is a quote lifted directly from a movie? But no, not only was it lifted directly from a movie, there's actually a reference at the back of the comic showing about 20 places where they deliberately lifted dialogue from movies that they enjoyed and put it into the book. Guys, that's called plagiarism. That's not doing an homage. That's just ripping them right the hell off. And for that reason, because the book itself is not terrible, but at the same time, it's disqualifying. And that is basically the score, quote unquote, that I'm going to give this book, is disqualifying. And I'm talking about Core Draft The Reckoning by Andy Smith. You can't just plagiarize movies and then throw a comic at your readers without doing basic bitch quality control and expect anybody to buy your crap afterwards. Now, maybe someday he'll have another story in the line of he'll conclude the Core Draft epic and move on to something else, and I'll pick that up. But forget this freaking series. This one's out of here. This one's the Pete freaking Rose of my review channel. Don't just release a comic out there and show readers you don't care. You don't care enough to either write your own dialogue, and Andy Smith's the artist, not the writer. I forget who's the writer on Core Draft. But either you don't care about writing your own dialogue, and you don't have the patience or caring to do the proper quality control, then just forget it. Find another line of work. God, I hope this is the only comic that ever hits that particular category. I really don't want to see any other comics in that category ever. So there you have it. This is my overall score, revised. Now it's got all of the books on the independent scene that I have reviewed. Now, this is not all the books that I've reviewed in total, but it's all the books that it made sense for me to put on here because really, there's a book called Demon Skin that I reviewed an issue of, but that was from 1997. There's no point in going back that far. Likewise, I reviewed Mark Millar's Nemesis Reloaded, and I reviewed Marvel's Night Thrasher #1. No sense in really putting those on the scorecard because nobody's comparing themselves really against those particular kinds of titles anyway. Really what we're doing is we're looking at the independent comic scene and trying to see how those comics stack up against one another so that people kind of have an idea of where their dollars should flow. And hopefully this list is going to give you that idea. So I'm Mike Partika. Thank you very much for watching. I appreciate your time, and thanks for letting me explain my rankings behind these and the reasonings behind these. And hopefully this will help in your determination of what you're going to plunk down on. And other than that, I think the next book that's going to hit this list is Horseman, coming from Rippaverse Comics. I was pretty close to the front of the line on getting my copies of Horseman, one to read and one to shred for scans. And I expect that'll be coming this week sometime. So my hope is that by next weekend I might have a review of Horseman #1 from the Rippaverse. That's going to be written by Chuck Dixon and drawn by Joe Bennett. So thanks again for watching. I'm Mike Partika. Please do subscribe if you haven't already so that you can be notified whenever I have future reviews, Horseman being the next likely one. And I will talk to you later.